Over the last 4 years, I've done all of my astrophotography with a simple star tracker, the SkyWatcher Pro, but recently I've been able to use a go-to mount. These might seem a little intimidating at first. I know I was a little bit afraid of it, but after the last 3 nights, I think I finally got a handle on it, and I wanted to walk you guys through the entire setup process. As you can see here, I'm using the SkyWatcher EQ6R-Pro mount. If you have another type of go-to mount, that's okay, you can still follow along, just be aware there might be a few minor differences. The first thing we want to do is connect the power cable, and I've got mine right here. I'm just going to plug it in right there where it says power 12 volt. After I've got the power cable connected to the mount, then I need to plug the 12 volt port into some type of external battery. At this point, I actually have 2 Jackery batteries, and I'm going to plug the mount into the larger Jackery battery here. The smaller one, I'm going to use that to power my ASIair Pro. Now I realize there are more efficient ways to do this, but I'm still just getting into this. Like I said, I've only used the mount for about 3 nights, and for right now, this works for me. Speaking of the ASIair Pro, let's get that one powered right now as well. I've just got this sitting on a little tripod next to my big go-to mount. Again, not the best setup, but it works. And over on the side here, we have a little 12 volt input right there. If you just got your ASIair Pro, you may also need to buy a special 12 volt cable, which you can see right here. This is one I bought off of Amazon for about $15, and you'll see a screenshot of it here. I'm going to plug in one end though to my ASIair Pro, and then the large end is going to go into my other Jackery battery. Let's get back to the ASIair Pro and talk about all the different connections we need to make. If I turn this around, you'll see that we actually have quite a few ports here on the side. I've got 2 USB 3.0 ports and 2 USB 2.0 ports. And for the 3.0 ports, one you want to attach the flash drive. That way you can save all your images to that flash drive. And then the other USB 3.0 port is going to connect to your dedicated astro camera if you have one. Alternatively, if you had a DSLR and it's compatible with the ASIair, you can plug it in there. But for most of you, hopefully you have a good dedicated astro camera, which should give you great results. So again, we have plugging the one in there. The other end of that cable is going to plug into the back of your camera. Next, let's connect the auto guider cable to our ASIair Pro. In my case, I've got the ZWO 120 mini auto guider. So I'm going to plug the one USB port into the ASIair here. And then the other end of that cable, of course, is going to go into the back of the auto guider. There's one final USB cable we need to connect, and we're going to plug it in here on the last available port on the ASIair Pro. After we plugged it into the ASIair Pro, we're going to plug in the other end to our go-to mount if you have the ability. Only some go-to mounts have a USB port connection. If yours does, it's going to make your night a lot easier. For those of you using an electronic filter wheel like you see here, make sure you plug in that USB cable to the back of your dedicated astro camera. That's actually going to work just fine. You also have a 12 volt power cable there on the right. That's going to power your dedicated astro camera's cooling system. So you want to make sure you grab one of those power cables that would have come with the ASIair Pro, plug one into there, and then over on the ASIair Pro, you've got 4 DC 12 volt output ports. You can plug in your cooling cable to any of those 4 ports. I usually plug it into port number 1. Then you can use the other 3 for maybe an electronic focuser, a dew heater, or whatever else you might need. The only cable left is the ST4 cable, and in fact, you don't even need that anymore with the go-to mount. I want to thank everybody who mentioned that in the original edit of this video. Because we're using the ASIair Pro and a go-to mount, all you need is a USB connection from the auto guider to the ASIair Pro, and you can do your guiding, so that's a nice change. The only thing missing at this point is the hand controller, and thankfully, we don't even need to worry about that for this workflow. I'm going to show you a way to do everything through the ASIair Pro today. No hand controller required. At this point in the video, I'm just going to show you attaching my gear, although really if you were doing everything step by step, you would have already attached all your gear and then go through the cables. So this is a little bit out of order. No big deal. I'm assuming you know to obviously attach your gear first. In this case, I'm just making sure it's actually securely fastened because there's nothing worse than attaching it and then watching it slide to the ground and break. Speaking of which, it's always a good idea to attach your counterweight before your telescope or camera. If you try to attach a big heavy telescope before the counterweight, it's possible that the mount will slip around and fall due to the uneven weight balance, and you could break your telescope. Again, it's always a good idea to drag everything out in the backyard first, attach the counterweight, then after the counterweight is securely attached, you can go ahead and add your camera and telescope to the top. When you're securing your counterweight, really make sure it's tight, because I've noticed these counterweights tend to slip a little bit more than I'm used to. And obviously don't leave your foot right under there in case it does fall. And while you're at it, quickly attach the end cap. That way if it does end up sliding, it won't fall and crush your foot. There we go. We have one counterweight attached. That's going to be more than enough for this setup. Now that we've securely attached all of our camera gear and the cables, we can balance both our right ascension and declination axes. This is the right ascension lever right down there. That's going to allow you to turn everything like you see there. That's our right ascension. The declination is going to be up here. Same thing, you're going to loosen that lever, and that's going to allow you to turn your camera and telescope and all that kind of like left and right. That's our declination axis. Again, it's not really left and right, but that's one way to think about it anyway. Here we can see the full process. Again, at this point you should be aimed up towards Polaris, have done a rough alignment. We're going to loosen our declination and our right ascension levers, turn everything horizontally, and watch what happens. In this case, my camera swung down like that very hard. That means I'm back heavy. I've got too much weight on the back of my telescope setup, and it's pulling down. So the way to fix that is to loosen these two big knobs here and slide everything forwards. That way it's no longer back heavy. When I rotate it back down to horizontal, we can see that it's neither front heavy nor back heavy. It's not pulling one way or the other. So I've now balanced my declination axis. And thankfully my right ascension axis was already balanced. You can see here neither the camera nor the counterweight side is pulling down. That means the counterweight is in the right spot. But if you notice one side was pulling down, you would just move the counterweight up or down to balance it out. If you haven't done so already, now would be a good time to go over to your batteries and turn them on. That way you can turn on the mount and the ASIAir Pro. That's all taken care of there. Now I can go to my mount, hit the power switch on there, and then go to my ASIAir Pro and hit the power switch on there as well. This completes the beginning of our workflow. From here, we're going to do a polar alignment, set up our auto run, do our go-to, and a lot more. Again, I'm assuming at this point you've already done a rough polar alignment just by looking over the top of your star tracker, or in this case the go-to mount, and making sure you see Polaris right over the top of it. If you did that, you're ready to go. From here on out, we're just going to be looking at my cell phone, and I'm going to walk you through step by step what I did, and we'll also talk about some of the nice features of a go-to mount. The first thing you want to do is go into your Wi-Fi settings. And one of the problems I have with the ASIAir Pro, it's not really the device's fault, it's more my phone's fault. It always tries to connect to the strongest Wi-Fi network, in this case my home Wi-Fi, even if it's way in the backyard. So unfortunately what I have to do every night is forget my home network. That way I don't run into any connection issues. Now I can connect to the ASIAir Pro's Wi-Fi network. If this is your first time connecting to the ASIAir Pro, the password is 1234567 by default. Then we can load up the ASIAir app on our phone and go through the initial setup. This is really just going to depend on the specific mount you're using. And today I am using the SkyWatcher EQ6R-Pro. But this is where it gets a little bit complicated because there's no option in the menu that says that. So you have to get a little bit creative, and I'll show you what I mean here in a second. All right, so here's our initial interface, and there's a lot of information here. The first thing to do is verify that your latitude and longitude is correct there on the left. It should be, as long as you have a GPS connection. Even if you're out in the middle of nowhere, that should still be accurate. The mount. This is what I was getting at. You have a lot of choices here. In the past, I was using on-camera SD4 for my SkyGuider Pro. But because we now have a fancy go-to mount, I'm assuming, you can choose from any of the options you see here. Maybe you have a Celestron AVX, you can choose that. In my case, I would have thought to choose one of the SkyWatcher options way down here because I have a SkyWatcher mount. And it gets a little bit confusing because there are so many choices. Because I connected my go-to mount to my ASIAir Pro via that USB cable, which I showed you earlier, I'm actually going to choose either EQ mod mount or EQ mod with SkySafari. Both of these are going to allow me to do everything in the ASIAir Pro without needing the hand controller. And that's why I really love this workflow. Provided it works, it does a great job and it really simplifies and speeds up the whole process. For the purpose of this video, I'm going to start off with EQ mod with SkySafari. Then I can move down and verify that the main scope and guide scope focal length are correct. You don't want to apply any calculations to these. Use the exact focal length. In my case, the red cat is 250 millimeters, but it automatically corrects it to 247, so I don't bother changing it. My guide scope focal length is 120 millimeters, and you'll see my main camera and guide camera have already been set. Everything looks good. Now I can hit enter. This will bring us to the main user interface for the ASIAir Pro. This is how we can access all the different functions, including our polar alignment, the guiding, the go-to, and a lot more. The first thing I want to look at is that little window over on the right. This is basically going to replace your hand controller. We can adjust the declination and the right ascension axes now. This is a big change coming from a star tracker where you have to move everything manually for the most part. Here I can just touch these buttons and slew my mount wherever I want to. I can also adjust the speed to 800x. That's going to make everything move a lot faster. This would be one way to find an object, doing it manually, of course. Thankfully, we've got the go-to function though, so we really shouldn't have to worry about that too much. I'm sure there's going to be a few people who are having connection issues, so let's talk about that now. If you click the telescope icon up top in the center, that'll bring up your mount settings. I'm going to turn off the little green switch there. That will bring us back to our starting point. And if you look closely, there's a little question mark icon. If you click on that, that's going to give you some valuable information. Feel free to pause the video and read through all this. Basically what it's telling us is that if we have the SkySafari app installed on our phone, we just need to input these settings and we should now be able to communicate between SkySafari, the ASIAir Pro, and ultimately our go-to mount. And we'll talk about this more here in a minute when we actually get inside SkySafari. I just wanted you to be aware that you can click the question mark and get everything you need to know. Alternatively, if you don't have SkySafari installed on your phone, you could choose the EQ mod mount. Same thing here. If you hit the question mark, it's going to tell you what settings to input. In my case, I've already done it, but let me show you what will happen maybe the first time you're doing your setup. In my case, when I first went through this process, my baud value, I think that's how you say it, was set to 9600 by default. So when I tried to connect and turn on the mount here in the software, it would go through and it would ultimately give me an error because for whatever reason that baud value wasn't allowing the mount to communicate. So if you run into this problem and you know your cable's connected, that's most likely the cause. And we'll put this to 115,200 and try again. There we go. It works perfectly. Because we've cut the hand controller completely out of the equation, we want to verify that the latitude and longitude and other information is being synced with the mount. And you can do that just by clicking that button there. That's another reason I love this workflow, because it's a real pain in the ass to have to go through the hand controller every night and input all this manually on some 1990s hand controller. Oddly enough, the tracking does not start automatically. You actually have to come in here into the settings and turn on the little switch for the tracking. I'm coming from a SkyWatcher Pro where as soon as you turn on the tracker, it begins tracking. So this was a little bit new to me, and that's why I wanted to make sure I included it right here. I've turned on the tracking and put the rate to sidereal, which is the speed of the stars. That's what we're going to use tonight. Our next goal is to choose the object that we want to photograph for the night. And if we scroll up, there's a little line there that says View Objects. If you click on that, you're now going to enter the ASIAir Pro's database. Feel free to scroll down through here. There's a lot of valuable information, both the object name, the coordinates for it, and even where it's going to be in the sky using that graph over on the right. If you click on Hold on an object, you can add it to maybe your favorites list. That's what I've done for all my favorite objects. That way I don't have to go through here and hunt for it each time. I can just go directly to what I want to photograph. You can also search directly for the objects that you want, but this is another problem I have. There's no way to search by the common name. If I want to photograph Orion, it can't find it, which is a real disappointment. That's where SkySafari is going to come in, which we'll talk about here in a minute. Alternatively, you can click the three lines in the upper right corner and choose whatever category you want. Maybe the Messier objects, NGC, SH2, whatever. For me, the Messier objects, those are usually the bigger, brighter ones that are going to be more fun to photograph. So I just scroll down through here, and there we have the Orion Nebula, for example. I can click and hold on it, add it to my favorites, or even just click on the thumbnail and get a nice little overview of that object. And that's the basics of the ASIAir Pro's internal object database. If you're really smart and you know all the M numbers and SH numbers and IC numbers and NGC numbers, you'll have no problem. But if you're a normal guy like me and you don't know all that stuff, you just know what it's called, like Andromeda or Veil Nebula, then this is one area we're going to have some trouble. Hopefully they'll update this in the future. Alternatively though, you can use SkySafari. That's what we're going to look at next, but I just wanted to show you one way to do it here in the ASIAir Pro app. SkySafari is available on both Android and iPhone, but you want to make sure you buy at least the Plus version. If you get the basic cheat version, it won't be able to do everything that I'm going to show you today. So again, at least get the Plus version. That'll work fine on both Android and iPhone. I'm going to demo with Android today. I'm going to show you how to set it up to work with the ASIAir Pro and your go-to mount. The first thing you want to do is click on these settings there at the bottom of the screen. But you can see the interface is very similar to Stellarium, but it is quite a bit nicer here. After you get into the settings, you can scroll down, look for the telescope submenu, and then click on Setup. When you get into the telescope setup menu, we're just going to repeat what the ASIAir Pro told us a couple minutes ago. We'll start off with the scope type at the very top. The ASIAir Pro told us to use Meade LX200 Classic, so that's what we're going to do. After we set the scope type, the mount type should be set to Equatorial Go-To German. That should work fine. That's what I've been doing. I haven't had any issues. And then from there, the connect via Wi-Fi should be checked. Auto detect SkyFi is turned off. The IP address is 10.0.0.1. The port number is 9624. If you've done all that, you should be good to go. You can now exit the settings menu and then click connect at the bottom of the screen. That will connect your mount to SkySafari and the ASIAir Pro as well. If you get an error when you try and connect, it could be because your phone has the LTE data connection, which is some weird Android bug with all these astrophotography apps. So turn off your LTE data connection and try to connect again. Everything should just work though if you've been following along step by step. And this is where SkySafari really shines, because you're free to now move around and click on anything you want to go to. In this case, the North American Nebula. I just tap on it, then I hit Go To at the bottom of the screen. It will now automatically move my mount directly to the North American Nebula, and it should center it up right there in the frame, so you can quickly begin taking photos. If you're not quite sure where the object is that you want to photograph, you could always search for it. In the very bottom left of the screen, you'll see a little search icon. If you tap on that, that'll bring up a search window. And this is where I do like SkySafari, because unlike the ASIAir Pro, you can search for the common name, like horsehead, and it should have no problem pulling that up. Once we search for horsehead, you can see all the information there. And at the bottom of the screen, you'll see a little button that says Go To. Once you click on Go To, it will now move your mount to the Horsehead Nebula. Very easy way to do everything. So that's how you're going to use SkySafari to find the objects that you want with the help of the ASIAir Pro in the back end and, of course, your go-to mount. Now that we've done a brief overview of the ASIAir Pro and SkySafari, I want to walk you through the entire workflow from start to finish. That way you understand what steps you need to do and in what order. Let's pretend we've just restarted the ASIAir app on our smartphone and we're starting over. The first thing I want to do is take some 3-second long test photos with my telescope. I have the Bahtinov mask on the front of my Red Cat, and this is going to allow me to get sharp stars. I'm going to slowly turn that focusing ring back and forth until I can see a 3-line pattern called diffraction spikes. I'm just taking quick 3-second long photos because I don't want to waste a lot of time here. And on my electronic filter wheel, I'm using the L filter, which lets in a lot of light. If you're planning on shooting narrowband though, you might want to use one of your narrowband filters to focus on because it might shift between your different filters. In this case though, I'm just keeping it simple. So again, I take a 3-second long photo, adjust my focusing ring very slightly on my telescope, and then I see how the diffraction spikes change. That right there is looking pretty close. I can always try to find a brighter star where the spikes will be more visible. But in this case, that was good enough. Now that I've focused my telescope, I can pull the Bahtinov mask off and take one more 3-second long photo to verify everything looks good. That looks good enough for me. I can always refocus later. It's just important that the stars are fairly sharp. That way you can do the next step, which is our polar alignment. If I go to the polar alignment interface here, I'll click the play button over on the right, And this is another reason why I love the ASIAir Pro. It pretty much automates this entire process. And when you compare this to something like the PoleMaster software, this is much, much better in almost every single aspect. Because we have a go-to mount, the ASIAir is even going to rotate it for us. We don't have to worry about loosening the right ascension lever and rotating it ourselves. It just does it all automatically. Once it reaches about 60 degrees, it stops the rotation and then takes another photo. It's doing what we call plate solving. In other words, it takes the photo, it looks up the stars with its internal database, and it knows where it's pointing. And this whole process just sees how the stars have rotated from the first photo to the second. And very simply, it's going to tell us to move, in this case, up 1 degree, 11 minutes, and then to the left, 2 degrees, 48 minutes, 52 seconds. This is where you'd want to go down to your wedge or your latitude base, whatever you want to call it, and try and make these adjustments. After you think you've done it, you can hit the refresh button down there at the bottom of the screen. It will take another photo and update your current settings. This is actually one area where I have a problem with the go-to mount though, because on my particular base, the altitude adjustment is a real pain. You have like this weird little lever you have to push in and then turn it. It's not very intuitive, and I actually really like the Star Tracker bases a lot better for this. The altitude knob or the altitude screws in some cases are a much better way to do things than a big old handle that you have to crank and turn, which isn't very precise, and it leads me to some problems. Anyway, with a little bit of practice, you'll eventually get the hang of it. And you want to just keep adjusting your altitude and azimuth screws until the total error is as low as possible. For me, if I can get it down around 5 arc minutes or 3 arc minutes, ideally less than that, that'd be fine. The ASIAir Pro really won't let you finish though until you're 2 arc minutes or less. That's what it wants you to be at. But if you say, you know what, it's good enough for me, you can always click that stop button over there on the right to get out of this interface. And that's what I did the other night. I got it down to about 3 arc minutes of error there. I said, I'm not wasting any more time. That's good enough. I stopped it. That's pretty much step 2. We focused our telescope. We did a precise polar alignment. Now we want to rotate everything back up to the starting position. If you forget to do this step, the go-to function might not work properly later on. So make sure you are aimed up towards Polaris. And one way to verify that is to take another 3-second long photo. You should see Polaris somewhere on the screen if you did your polar alignment correctly, and your telescope and camera are aimed up at the right spot. There we see Polaris over on the left. What I did there is click plate solve on the far left side of the screen, and I tried to sync this information to my mount. As you can see though, we cannot actually do a plate solve within 5 degrees, I think, of the north or south celestial pole. So in this case, you don't really have to worry about it. I'm just going through and just making sure that all of the information has been synced to the mount. I'm also going to turn on the tracking because for whatever reason the tracking got turned off. From here, you can either use the ASIAir Pro or SkySafari to decide what object you want to try and go to. If you look closely, I'm going to show you every single step I did because, like I said, I'm still fairly new to this. I've only done it about 3 nights, and on this night the go-to actually worked. So I wanted to show you everything I did, even if I made a mistake, which I'm not really sure if I did or not. So we're back in SkySafari. I connected my mount. It knows I'm aimed up right towards Polaris. That's a good sign. What I was going to do next is click on Polaris directly and align to it here in the application. To be honest, I don't really know if that does anything, but I did it and it seemed to help. So again, I tapped on Polaris. I hit align at the bottom of the screen, and now it should be aligned up to Polaris. At this point, my goal was to find an object that I wanted to photograph here in the app. My thought process was, let's start off very simple. I can see some bright stars off to the left of Polaris with my naked eye, and therefore if I can see them, I can verify if my telescope is actually aiming up to them or not. So I tapped on Navi here, then I hit Go To at the bottom of the screen. I watched as my mount moved my camera and telescope up towards this general region of the sky. To be honest, I don't quite remember what happened. I don't think it lined it up properly though, and that's why I got a little bit worried. So I backed out of SkySafari and said, let me just try and stick with the ASIAir Pro app because I'm a little bit more familiar with that. And that's ultimately what ended up working really well. When I got back to the ASIAir Pro, I took another 3-second long photo for plate solving. When this first photo completed though, I noticed I had star trails when I zoomed in. For whatever reason, the mount had stopped tracking. I don't know why. That's why I mentioned earlier, it's always a good idea to go back to your telescope settings and verify the tracking is turned on. Now that I've fixed that issue, I took another 3-second long photo to verify that the tracking was working properly this time. And that did the trick. I now had sharp stars and I could do a plate solve. If you want to do a plate solve, you have to stop any type of image capture, hit plate solve on the left, and then hit sync mount. When you do that, the mount should now know where it's pointing at in the sky, and you should be able to use the go-to function. Of course, you'll need to decide what object you want to go to. In this case, I already had the Rosette Nebula plugged in, so I did one more plate solve and then hit sync and go to NGC 2244, I think, which is the Rosette Nebula. At this point, it's moving my camera and telescope around in the sky, and I was honestly really surprised. Like I said, I spent about 2 nights messing around with this. I could not get the go-to function to work at all. On this night, as I walked you through step by step, it actually worked. I don't know what I did differently than the nights before, but when I take one more 3-second long photo now, watch what happens. If any of you are really familiar with the Rosette Nebula, then you should recognize this little cluster of stars right in the center of the screen. I know as soon as I saw those, I got really excited because that meant I was actually aimed up at the Rosette Nebula. And just to be sure, I hit plate solve one more time and then hit sync mount, just to verify that the coordinates there match what I see over on the right-hand side of the screen. To prove that this is the Rosette Nebula, I now went to my filter wheel settings, and rather than using the L filter, I switched to the H alpha filter. This filter is going to show the nebula detail a lot better. And in fact, on this particular night, the full moon was out, or nearly full, and it was casting a lot of light into the scene. But by using a narrowband filter, I can cut out almost all of that light pollution from the moon, or even a big city if I wanted to, and get some amazing photos like the one you saw at the very start of this video. And there we have it, the Rosette Nebula in narrowband in just 30 seconds. Obviously it's very grainy, but when you're taking a bunch of 5 or maybe 6, 7, 8 minute long photos, it's going to turn out to be a great final image. From here, the only thing left is to start up our guiding, turn on our camera's cooling system, and then decide what camera settings we want to use. Most of the workflow's done. There's just a few more steps we got to do. One thing I forgot to do was focus my guide scope, and the stars were really out of focus here. It was still sharp enough though for me to do my guiding, and because I was running on a tight schedule, I didn't bother trying to refocus it. All I did was hit the begin guiding button on the right, and because I have a go-to mount now, I had to change the deck mode to auto, because we now can use both right ascension and declination for our guiding. That's going to give us much better results. Another thing I did was go into my guide settings and turn on dithering. Dithering is going to clean up a lot of artifacts caused by your sensor, and in most cases, this means you no longer have to take bias or dark frames to some extent, because the dithering will average out most of those sensor problems. And you can always take a screenshot here and copy my settings. That worked well for me. But really, the pixels value there is going to depend on your focal length of your telescope. These at least get you started though, and verify that RA only is turned off, because if you have a go-to mount, you want to have both RA and declination dithering. To be clear, the way dithering works is it moves your camera after every single photo in a random direction. And this random motion of the object over the course of 10, 20, 30, 40 plus photos will smooth out banding and hot pixels and things like that, color model especially. So dithering is a great tool. I had a video a couple of months ago where I really didn't see the point of dithering because I was using a SkyWatcher Pro and it really didn't do anything for me. It just wasted a lot of time. But with a go-to mount, this works much better, and dithering is definitely a smart choice. While the auto guider was doing its calibration, that gave me some downtime to continue on with the workflow, because there's a lot of stuff you have to get ready to go. From here, I went to the auto run menu, and you'll notice that I already had some settings from the night before. I was taking 5-minute long photos with my sulfur and hydrogen alpha filter. Tonight though, I wanted to throw an oxygen filter in the mix, that way I could have a full set of narrowband images. And it's very easy to do here in the ASIAir Pro app. Another reason why I really like this, because I can quickly come in here, set my shutter speed, the amount of photos I want to take, what filter I want to use, and the software is going to label all my images as well. So when I get to the computer, it's going to be very easy to sort through all these. After I created my shooting schedule, I backed out of there, and I went to check on my guiding calibration. I figured it should almost be done, and I just double click on the graph to get back to the guiding interface if I want to do that. In this case though, I almost forgot to turn on my camera's cooling system. This is something that I'll actually warn you about if you're ready to take your photos. It says, hey, turn on your cooling. So in the main camera settings, just flick the switch. I put it to minus 20 degrees Celsius, and there we go. While I was busy getting everything else completed, the guiding finished the calibration and it's now running. Here we can see we got a real nice little line there with both our right ascension in blue and our declination in red. If you're still new to all these terms, it'll take you a little bit of a while to research it. I've got some articles on my website that might help on my blog. I explain what arc seconds are and what all these lines mean. But really, as long as the lines are fairly close to the center line, you'll be okay. Another thing I forgot to do was check the focus on my telescope. If you remember at the very start of the video, I focused with my L filter, but it's been probably 15-20 minutes now. It got a little bit colder at night, and I'm using an H alpha filter. So it would have been a smart idea to refocus the telescope. However, what you just saw there was me zooming in to see if the stars look sharp. I thought they looked okay. There's also even a little focus submenu here where it will zoom in kind of like a DSLR on live view and give you almost a real-time preview. So you can tweak that focus ring back and forth to make the stars as sharp as possible. To be honest, I was running late for dinner, so I didn't bother refocusing it. I said it's close enough. If I try and touch it, I'll probably make it worse. Good enough for me. With my guiding running, my focus looking good, and I know the mount's running well, so I know I can get 5-minute sharp exposures, I went back to the auto run submenu and let it go. And I'm now beginning my series of 5-minute long photos for sulfur, H alpha, and oxygen. And just to be sure, I went to the telescope settings and verified the tracking was turned on. And that's all there is to it. We've now completed the entire workflow in a pretty short amount of time without the need for that crappy old hand controller, which drove me crazy. So I love the fact that the ASIAir Pro allows you to pretty much do everything. And for the few areas where it doesn't work so well, you could always jump over to SkySafari and use that for your go-to, provided it's working properly. And that's all I've got for you in today's video. Hopefully you got something out of this. Really, my main goal was to show you step-by-step what I did and how I was able to get the go-to function working, all through the ASIAir Pro for the most part. To be honest, when I was thinking about getting a go-to mount, I was always very overwhelmed because I knew it would bring a whole new set of challenges with it. But after just 2 or 3 nights, I was able to get everything up and running, and at least for one night, I didn't encounter any problems. So hopefully this gives you the confidence. If you're still having trouble with your go-to mount, you can try it again with some of the things you might have learned. Or if you're thinking about getting a go-to mount, I hope this made things a little bit easier, and you see it's really not as daunting as it might have seemed.